1 million people starved while grain ships left Irish ports. The economists watching had a theory about why that was necessary. September 1845. A blight arrived in Ireland. It came from America, carried on potato plants. No one knew what it was yet. The fungus Phytophthora infestans would eventually destroy the entire potato crop, the food that sustained 8 million people. But in that first month, the disaster was still invisible. What happened next wasn't a failure of supply. It was a collision between two incompatible ideas about how economies should work. October 1845. The first crop failure was confirmed. Irish landlords and merchants began calculating losses, but here's the fact that matters. Ireland was exporting grain, wheat, oats, beef, all of it leaving for England, while potatoes, the only food most Irish tenant farmers could afford, were rotting in the ground. This wasn't an accident of geography. It was the result of centuries of property law. The British government faced a choice. They could intervene, buy grain, distribute it, suspend exports, or they could let the market function. The decision they made wasn't based on cruelty. It was based on an economic argument that still shapes policy today. The argument had a name: moral hazard. Moral hazard is the idea that if you protect people from the consequences of their choices, they'll make worse choices. Give someone insurance and they'll be reckless. Give a farmer relief and he'll stop working. Give a country food aid and it'll stop feeding itself. The theory sounds logical, but it requires an assumption that the people suffering made choices that created their suffering. By November 1845, the British government began drafting policy. They appointed Sir Charles Trevelyan to oversee Irish relief. Trevelyan was not a cruel man. He was an administrator who believed deeply in economic principle. He understood that the Irish poor were suffering. He also believed that direct aid would weaken their character and make them dependent. The policy that emerged was deliberate. The government would not ban grain exports. It would not forcibly redistribute food. Instead, it would offer public works projects at wages set below market rate. Those who worked could eat, those who didn't couldn't. This, Trevelyan believed, would preserve the moral fiber of the poor while the market corrected itself. By December 1845, this framework was in place, but no one yet understood the scale of what was coming. The potato blight wasn't a one-year event. It would return, and when it did, the moral hazard argument would mean something very different than it had before. Summer 1846, the blight returned, and it was worse. 90% of the crop failed. The moral hazard theory suddenly faced a test. What happens when the problem isn't behavioral, when people aren't making bad choices, when the choice itself has been removed? The public works system collapsed under the weight. Too many people needed work. The wages were too low to buy food at inflated prices. People began to starve while digging roads that no one needed. The work itself became a form of punishment, not a form of aid. By autumn 1846, Trevelyan and others began to see a problem. But they didn't abandon the theory, they refined it. The issue, they reasoned, wasn't that moral hazard was wrong, it was that the Irish were too demoralized to respond to incentives. They needed sterner measures, workhouses were expanded, conditions were made deliberately harsh. The logic was circular. If aid doesn't work, it's because people are morally weak. If people are morally weak, they need harsher conditions to motivate them. The theory couldn't be falsified by reality. Reality had to be falsified by the theory. 1847. The year the famine peaked, somewhere between 1 and 2 million people died: typhus, dysentery, starvation. The workhouses became charnel houses. People entered them to survive and died inside them. The moral hazard theory had been tested, and it had failed catastrophically. But here's what makes this historically significant. The theory didn't die with the people. Trevelyan lived until 1886. He wrote about the famine as a success. He argued that it had cleared out the excess population and made room for agricultural improvement. The moral hazard framework remained intact. What happened in Ireland between 1845 and 1852 wasn't inevitable. It was a policy choice made by people who believed a particular economic theory. The theory said protecting people from hardship makes them weak. Therefore, hardship must be preserved. The Irish weren't starving because of scarcity. They were starving because of ideology. The moral hazard argument didn't disappear after 1847. It evolved. It shows up in debates about unemployment insurance, about healthcare, about disaster relief, about whether people who lose homes in fires deserve government help or if that would make them dependent. The shape of the argument is always the same. The Irish famine reveals something important about how economies actually work. They don't work through pure logic, they work through assumptions about human nature. And when those assumptions are wrong, the consequences are measured in bodies. The moral hazard theory wasn't disproven by the famine, it was reinforced by it, because the people who believed it had the power to decide what counted as proof. What the famine teaches us is this: economic theories have real consequences. They shape who gets food and who doesn't, who gets help and who gets told to help themselves. Understanding the theory, seeing how it works and where it breaks, is the only way to recognize when it's being used to justify the unjustifiable. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research. Subscribe to uncover the hidden economic logic behind the policies that shape our lives. There's a new historical case study every week. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research.